You know that feeling when someone says, "I'm fine," and everyone else simply accepts it, but something inside you quietly tells you they aren't? You can't always explain why. Maybe it was the way they looked away for half a second. Maybe it was the hesitation before they smiled. Or maybe it was nothing you could point to at all. For a long time, I thought people who noticed these things were just overthinking. But then I started reading what psychologists have been discovering about the way some minds naturally process information, and it completely changed how I understood this experience. Here's what makes this fascinating. Most people assume that seeing what others don't is some kind of special intuition or mysterious sixth sense. Psychology paints a much quieter picture. What often looks like intuition is actually your brain collecting dozens of tiny pieces of information without asking for your permission. While everyone else is paying attention to the conversation itself, your mind is also noticing facial expressions, tone of voice, body language, pauses, inconsistencies, and emotional shifts. Individually, these signals seem meaningless. Together, they begin telling a story that many people never consciously notice. Think about walking through a familiar neighborhood after it rains. Most people see wet sidewalks and puddles. Someone else notices fresh tire tracks, muddy footprints leading into an alley, a broken branch on the sidewalk, and the smell of damp earth. They're looking at the exact same street. The difference isn't better eyesight, it's where their attention naturally goes. In many ways, your mind works like that. You don't necessarily observe more than everyone else. You simply connect details that other people leave disconnected. Anyway, this is where psychology becomes incredibly interesting. Researchers who study perception have found that our brains are constantly filtering information because the world throws far too much at us every second. Imagine trying to hear every conversation inside a crowded restaurant at the same time. Your brain simply can't do it, so it decides what deserves your attention and quietly ignores the rest. Most people filter out thousands of subtle emotional signals every single day without realizing it. But some people naturally allow a few more of those signals to reach conscious awareness. That sounds like a gift, doesn't it? Sometimes it absolutely is, but there's another side to it that rarely gets talked about. Seeing more often means carrying more. If you're constantly noticing hidden emotional tension, hidden frustration, awkward silence, or someone's discomfort, your brain has more information to process than the average person. It's a little like having 10 browser tabs open while everyone else only has 3. Nothing may seem overwhelming on its own, but eventually your mental energy starts running low without you understanding why. Here's the part most people overlook. People who notice hidden patterns often spend years believing they're simply anxious. They assume they're imagining problems that don't exist because other people don't seem to notice them. But psychology suggests something different. Sometimes your mind isn't creating patterns where none exist, it's detecting patterns that other people unconsciously filtered out. That doesn't mean you're always correct, of course. No one is. But it does mean your brain may be working with information that never fully reaches someone else's awareness. One concept psychologists often talk about is something called thin slicing. It's the brain's remarkable ability to make surprisingly accurate judgments based on very small amounts of information. Long before your conscious mind finishes analyzing a situation, another part of your brain has already been quietly comparing what you're seeing to thousands of previous experiences you've stored throughout your life. That's why you occasionally get a strange feeling about someone before they've done anything obviously wrong. Your brain has noticed tiny similarities to situations you've encountered before, even if you can't immediately explain what those similarities are. Now, that doesn't mean every gut feeling should automatically be trusted. Our minds can also be influenced by fear, personal bias, or past experiences that no longer apply. But here's where self-awareness becomes incredibly important. People who genuinely see subtle patterns often learn to ask themselves 2 questions. What exactly am I noticing? And could there be another explanation? That small pause allows observation and curiosity to work together instead of letting assumptions take over. Something else quietly happens when you become highly aware of other people. You begin reading emotional energy almost automatically. Maybe you've walked into a meeting where everyone was smiling, but somehow the room still felt heavy. Or you've met someone who seemed perfectly friendly, yet something about the interaction left you strangely exhausted. Your brain isn't responding only to words, it's responding to emotional consistency. When someone's expressions, tone, posture, and language don't fully match each other, your mind notices the mismatch before you consciously understand why. The interesting part is, emotional intelligence isn't always loud. We often imagine emotionally intelligent people as outgoing, charismatic, or exceptionally social. In reality, some of the most emotionally aware people are surprisingly quiet. They spend more time observing than speaking. They notice how conversations change when certain people enter the room. They remember small details others forget. They recognize subtle shifts in someone's behavior long before those changes become obvious. It isn't because they're trying to analyze everyone around them. Their attention simply moves towards those details naturally. If these ideas resonate with you, you might enjoy exploring more psychology like this. Every week we dive into the hidden patterns behind personality, behavior, and the way our minds quietly shape everyday life. And if these conversations help you understand yourself a little better, subscribing is one simple way to make sure you don't miss the next one. Here's another layer that surprised me when I first learned about it. People who notice more aren't always the loudest thinkers. In fact, many process information slowly and internally. While someone else immediately responds during a conversation, you're still connecting everything that has happened over the last 5 minutes. Hours later, something suddenly makes sense. A comment that seemed harmless now carries a completely different meaning because your brain finally assembled all the pieces. To other people, it looks like overthinking. From the inside, it's often careful pattern recognition unfolding at its own pace. Of course, there are moments when this ability becomes emotionally exhausting. Imagine listening to music where every instrument is equally loud instead of hearing one simple melody. Beautiful, yes, but also overwhelming. That's what highly observant minds sometimes experience in social situations. They're not only hearing the conversation, they're processing facial expressions, emotional reactions, changing moods, hidden tension, and everyone's unspoken expectations all at once. No wonder they often need quiet afterward. Their minds have simply been working harder than anyone realized. This is also why many highly observant people value solitude more than most. It isn't because they dislike people, it's because solitude gives the brain an opportunity to organize everything it has quietly collected. Think of your mind like a desk that slowly fills with papers throughout the day. Every conversation leaves another sheet behind. Every emotional interaction adds another folder. Eventually, you need time to sort through everything before there's room for anything new. Solitude isn't an escape from people, it's often where clarity finally catches up with perception. So if you've spent years wondering why you seem to notice changes before everyone else, why certain environments drain you faster, or why your instincts often make sense after the facts catch up, psychology offers a surprisingly reassuring perspective. It may not mean you're too sensitive. It may not mean you're overthinking. It may simply mean your brain naturally pays attention to quieter layers of human behavior that many people never consciously see. And perhaps that's the most comforting part of all. Seeing what others don't isn't about being special or having extraordinary insight. It's about understanding that every mind filters reality differently. Some people notice opportunities, some notice risks, some notice facts, and some notice emotions hiding between the facts. None of these ways of seeing the world are inherently better than the others. They're simply different lenses through which we experience the same reality. The strange thing is, once you understand this about yourself, you stop questioning every instinct you have. You become less interested in whether everyone else agrees with what you noticed, and more interested in quietly observing where those patterns lead. Sometimes you'll be wrong. Sometimes you'll be surprisingly accurate. But either way, you begin trusting your curiosity instead of fighting it. Because at the end of the day, the psychology of people who see what others don't isn't really about having sharper eyes. It's about having a mind that's constantly connecting invisible dots.
Dots made from tiny moments, forgotten details, quiet emotions, and subtle shifts that most people never stop long enough to notice. And once you realize that's how your mind naturally works, the world begins to make a little more sense. If this conversation helped you understand yourself in a new way, I'd love for you to subscribe and become part of this growing community. And if you'd like to support these deep psychological explorations, consider becoming a channel member. Your support makes it possible to keep creating thoughtful videos like this. Until next time, remember this. Sometimes the most important things you'll ever notice are the ones no one else even realizes are there. And once you begin understanding how your own mind sees the world, you'll start recognizing those quiet patterns almost everywhere you look.